The bucket of dirty water hit Lyra Ashford before she even saw who threw it. She gasped as the cold liquid soaked through her dress, dripping down her arms and pulling at her feet on the stone floor of the packhouse kitchen. Laughter rang out behind her, sharp and cruel, before the girls who had thrown it disappeared around the corner, their voices fading into the halls above. Lyra did not turn to chase them. She never did. There was no point. In the Blackthorn Park, she was the Omega nobody wanted, the girl whose wolf had broken years ago and never healed. Chasing after the ones who mocked her only gave them more reason to laugh. She knelt down and began to mop up the mess with a rag, her fingers numb from the chill. Her back ached from hours of scrubbing pots before dawn, and her stomach twisted with hunger, since breakfast had already been cleared away before she was allowed near the table. This was her life, day after day, inside the park she was born into but never truly belonged to. 10 years ago, on the night of her first shift, something had gone wrong. Other wolves described that night as the greatest moment of their young lives, the instant their human bodies gave way to fear and instinct and power. For Lyra, it had been agony. Her bones had twisted halfway, her wolf clawing to break free but never fully emerging, as if something invisible held it back. She had collapsed in the forest that night, and when her parents found her, she was neither fully wolf nor fully girl, caught in a shape that made the healers whisper words like broken and cursed. From that day forward, everything changed. Her parents, once proud members of the Beta line, grew ashamed of her. They stopped introducing her to visiting parks. They stopped defending her when the other children began to call her names. Slowly, quietly, they distanced themselves, as if her condition might be contagious, as if standing too close to her would ruin their own standing among the wolves. Lyra wrung out the rag and stood, glancing toward the window. Beyond the glass, the forest stretched dark and endless, its branches swaying gently in the wind. It was the only place she felt anything close to peace. At night, when the pack house grew quiet and everyone else had gone to sleep, she would sleep outside and walk among the trees, speaking softly to no one, or perhaps to everyone, since some nights it felt as though the forest itself was listening. She never told anyone about those nights. If the pack knew she spent her evenings whispering to the woods instead of praying to be fixed, they would only find another reason to call her strange. A sharp voice snapped her back to the kitchen. "Are you finished, or do you plan to stand there daydreaming all morning?" Lyra turned to find Elira, the alpha's niece, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. Elira was beautiful in the way the pack admired, golden-haired and confident, with a wolf that had shifted perfectly on her first try. She never missed a chance to remind Lyra of that difference. "I'm finished," Lyra said quietly, setting the rag aside. "Good. Because the entire pack has real work to do today, unlike you." Elira's eyes swept over Lyra's damp dress with obvious distaste. "Did you fall in a puddle again?" Lyra said nothing. Silence was easier than explaining, and explaining never changed anything. Elira smirked and turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You should hear the news, actually. It might even interest someone like you, since you have nothing better to think about." "What news?" "The Alpha King is coming." Elira's voice dropped, filled with an excitement Lyra rarely heard from her. "Kale Draven himself. He is traveling from the Northern Territory for the Alliance Summit, and he will be staying here, in this very pack house, for 3 days. Lyra blinked. Even someone as isolated as she was had heard of Kale Draven. Every pack across the region knew his name, spoken sometimes with respect and sometimes with fear. He commanded the largest and strongest territory in the land, a king among alphas, and his wolf was said to be one of the fiercest ever born. Rumors claimed he had never taken a mate, that his beast was growing restless with each passing year, hungry for a bond it had never found. "Why would that interest me?" Lyra asked carefully. Elira laughed, the sound bright and mocking. "It doesn't, obviously. I only mentioned it because every unmated wolf in this pack is being prepared to stand before him. Except you, of course. The Alpha has already given orders. You are to stay in the kitchens the entire time he's here. Out of sight." She smiled sweetly, the kind of smile that carried a blade beneath it. "We wouldn't want to embarrass ourselves in front of a king." The words landed exactly as they were meant to, but Lyra had grown skilled at keeping her face still, at swallowing the sting before it reached her eyes. She only nodded. Elira studied her for a moment longer, as if disappointed by the lack of reaction, then turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Lyra remained standing in the kitchen, the wet rag forgotten in her hand. She should have felt nothing. She had long since stopped hoping for invitations to gatherings, stopped imagining herself standing proudly beside the other wolves. And yet a strange, unfamiliar feeling stirred faintly in her chest at the mention of the Alpha King's name, something she could not explain and did not have time to consider, because footsteps were already approaching, and with them came a new list of chores to finish before nightfall. She spent the rest of the day scrubbing floors, hauling firewood, and preparing rooms for the visiting dignitaries who would soon fill the pack house. Wolves from neighboring territories began arriving by afternoon, their carriages rolling through the gates, their voices loud with anticipation. Servants rushed in every direction, polishing silver, arranging flowers, hanging banners bearing the blackthorn crest. Lyra kept to the shadows, exactly as she was told. She carried trays of food to the kitchen entrance and left them there without stepping into the great hall. She avoided the main corridors whenever possible, slipping through narrow servant passages instead, her presence unnoticed, unremarkable, invisible. By the time evening fell, exhaustion weighed heavy on her shoulders. She finished her final task, stacking clean linens in a storage room near the back of the house, and allowed herself a moment to breathe. Through a small window, she could see the edge of the forest, dark and inviting under the rising moon. She thought of sleeping outside, just for a few minutes, to feel the cool air and quiet her racing thoughts. But before she could move, the sound of hooves and wheels echoed from the front gates, followed by a hush that fell over the entire pack house, a silence so sudden and complete that even the servants in the kitchen stopped their chatter. Lyra peered through the narrow window facing the courtyard and saw torches lifting into the air, illuminating a procession unlike anything the Blackthorn pack had welcomed before. Warriors in dark uniforms flanked a black carriage pulled by 4 enormous horses, their coats gleaming under the moonlight. At the front of the procession rode a single figure on horseback, tall and broad-shouldered, his presence alone commanding silence from everyone gathered to watch. Even from a distance, Lyra felt something shift inside her, a strange pull she could not name, as though the ground itself trembled beneath his arrival. Around her, whispers rippled through the servants gathering near the windows. "That's him," one of the maids breathed. "That's Kale-Draven." Lyra should have looked away. She should have returned to her linens and forgotten the entire spectacle, since none of it concerned her. But her eyes remained fixed on the rider as he dismounted in one smooth motion, his dark coat settling around him, his gaze sweeping briefly over the pack house before he disappeared through the front doors. For reasons she could not explain, her heart continued to race long after he vanished from sight, and for the first time in years, Lyra found herself wondering what the following days might bring. The great hall of the Blackthorn pack house had never looked so grand. Long tables stretched across the polished floor, covered in white cloths and silver platters, while banners bearing the Blackthorn crest hung from every beam. Candlelight flickered against the stone walls, and the air buzzed with nervous excitement as pack members took their places, each hoping to catch the eye of the king who now sat at the head of the room. Kale-Draven did not smile. He rarely did. He sat with one arm draped over the armrest of his chair, his sharp eyes moving across the room with the impatience of a predator who had never once needed to hurry. Beside him sat 2 of his personal guards, silent and alert, their eyes scanning every corner of the hall as though danger might appear from the shadows at any moment. The Blackthorn Alpha, a broad man named Corwin, rose from his seat and lifted a goblet in greeting. "Welcome, Alpha King Draven. Our pack is honored to host you and your warriors during the Alliance Summit. Please, let this evening be one of comfort after your long journey." Kale inclined his head slightly, the barest acknowledgement. "Your hospitality is appreciated, Alpha Corwin. Though I did not travel this far for comfort. The summit begins tomorrow, and there is much to discuss regarding the northern borders." Of course," Corwin said quickly, his smile tightening. "Tonight, however, is simply a welcome. My pack has prepared quite a gathering in your honor." As if on cue, a line of young women began to make their way toward the front of the hall, each one dressed in her finest clothing, hair arranged with care, expressions polished into practiced smiles. Corwin gestured toward them proudly. These are the unmated women of our pack, Alpha King. Perhaps among them, your wolf might find some interest. Kale's expression did not change, though something flickered behind his eyes, a flash of impatience quickly hidden. He had endured this ritual more times than he cared to remember, in pack after pack, territory after territory. Everywhere he traveled, hopeful families paraded their daughters before him, each believing their bloodline worthy of a king's attention. His wolf, ancient and restless, had never once responded. Not a flicker of recognition, not a single pull toward any face presented to him. 300 years without a mate had worn down even his patience. His advisors whispered that perhaps his wolf had lost the ability to bond entirely, that centuries of solitude had hardened something inside him beyond repair. Kale refused to believe it, though doubt crept in more often than he admitted. Elira stepped forward first among the Blackthorn women, her golden hair catching the candlelight as she offered a graceful bow. Alpha King, it is an honor to stand before you. Kale offered a polite nod, nothing more, his gaze already drifting past her toward the next woman in line. One by one they approached, each offering compliments, each hoping for some sign of interest, and one by one his wolf remained silent, indifferent, unmoved. Corwin, sensing the king's growing impatience, clapped his hands loudly. Let the feast begin. Perhaps good food and wine will lift everyone's spirits. Servants began pouring wine and carrying platters of roasted meat, fresh bread, and glazed vegetables to the tables. Kale accepted a goblet but drank little, his attention drifting toward the tall windows overlooking the dark forest beyond. Something about this pack house felt different from the others he had visited, though he could not yet identify what. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Lyra walked quickly alongside two other servants, preparing trays to be carried into the hall. She kept her head down, moving efficiently between the ovens and the counters, careful to remain unnoticed. The sounds of laughter and music drifted faintly from the great hall, a world she was never meant to enter. Take this tray to the side entrance, the head cook instructed her, gesturing toward a platter of fresh bread. Quickly now, before it turns cold. Lyra lifted the tray and made her way down the narrow servant corridor that connected the kitchen to a small door near the edge of the great hall. It was a route she had walked hundreds of times, one specifically designed to keep kitchen staff hidden from important guests. She reached the side door and balanced the tray carefully against her hip as she pushed it open just enough to slide the bread onto a nearby serving table without stepping fully into the hall. As she leaned forward, a sudden gust of wind swept through the open door behind her, carrying her scent further into the room than she intended. Inside the hall, Kale's entire body went rigid. His wolf, silent for 300 years, surged forward with a force that nearly knocked the breath from his lungs. A scent had reached him, faint but unmistakable, weaving through the aroma of roasted meat and burning candles like a single thread of gold through grey fabric. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening, as his eyes flashed from their usual dark brown into a brilliant, burning gold. Corwin, seated beside him, noticed immediately. Alpha King. Is something wrong? Kale did not answer. He rose from his seat so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the stone floor, silencing the surrounding conversations. Every eye in the hall turned toward him as he stood completely still, nostrils flaring, his entire focus locked onto a single point somewhere near the kitchen entrance. My king. One of his guards asked cautiously, rising as well. Kale's voice, when it finally came, was low and rough, barely containing something powerful straining beneath the surface. Someone was just at that door. Corwin blinked in confusion, glancing toward the small side entrance near the serving tables. That would only be kitchen staff, Alpha King. Nothing of concern, surely. But Kale was already moving, cutting through the crowded hall with long, purposeful strides, ignoring the startled murmurs rising around him. Elira reached out as if to stop him, a hopeful smile still fixed on her face, but he moved past her without a glance, his entire body drawn forward by something he could not ignore. He reached the small door and pushed it open fully, stepping into the narrow servant corridor beyond. The scent grew stronger here, warm and achingly familiar despite the fact that he had never encountered it before in 300 years of searching. His wolf howled inside him, desperate, joyful, and utterly certain in a way it had never been before. Lyra, still standing near the kitchen with an empty tray in her hands, froze when the door swung open behind her. She turned, expecting to find the head cook scolding her for taking too long, and instead found herself face to face with the Alpha King himself, his golden eyes locked onto her with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The corridor around them seemed to fade, the distant sounds of the feast growing muffled and far away, as if the entire world had narrowed down to the small space between them. "Who are you?" Cale asked, his voice quieter now, though no less commanding. Lyra swallowed hard, painfully aware of her simple, stained dress and the flour still dusting her hands. "Lyra, my Alpha King. I work in the kitchens." Something flickered across his face, disbelief mixed with wonder, as though her simple answer contradicted everything his wolf was screaming at him to believe. He stepped closer, and Lyra instinctively stepped back, her shoulders pressing against the cold stone wall. "Kitchens," he repeated softly, almost to himself. His eyes never left hers. "How is that possible?" Before Lyra could ask what he meant, heavy footsteps echoed behind him as Cohen and several pack members hurried down the corridor, drawn by the commotion. Cohen's face paled the moment he saw where Cale had gone. "Alpha King, please forgive the interruption. This is only a kitchen servant, nothing worth your attention. Please, return to the hall, and we can continue the celebration properly." Cale did not move. His gaze remained fixed on Lyra, studying her with an intensity that made her chest tighten uncomfortably. Slowly, he inhaled again, confirming what his instincts had already told him beyond any doubt. "This scent," he said quietly, turning finally to face Cohen, though his tone carried a warning that silenced the Alpha instantly. "Explain to me why the strongest bond my wolf has ever felt is coming from a servant girl your pack has hidden away in the kitchens." The color drained completely from Cohen's face, and behind him, the gathered pack members exchanged looks of confusion and disbelief, whispers beginning to spread even as Cale turned back toward Lyra, his expression unreadable, his golden eyes burning with something that looked dangerously close to certainty. Word spread through the great hall faster than fire through dry grass. By the time Cale led Lyra back through the narrow corridor and into the open space of the feast, every conversation had died into silence, every face turned toward the door, every pair of eyes fixed on the servant girl standing beside the Alpha King. Lyra felt the weight of their stares pressing against her skin like a physical thing. She wanted nothing more than to disappear back into the kitchen, to return to her buckets and rags where no one paid her any attention at all. But Cale's hand rested lightly at her back, guiding her forward, and there was something in his posture that made it clear he had no intention of letting her retreat. Cohen hurried after them, his voice strained with forced calm. "Alpha King, surely there has been some misunderstanding. This girl, she is not suited to stand before you. Her wolf is broken, damaged since childhood. She holds no status within this pack." Cale turned to face him slowly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Broken," he repeated, his voice quiet but carrying easily across the silent hall. "Explain what you mean by that word." Cohen hesitated, glancing nervously at the gathered pack members before answering. "Her first shift was incomplete, Alpha King. Her wolf never fully emerged. She has lived these past 10 years unable to shift properly, unable to sense the pack bond as the rest of us do. We have cared for her as best we could, given her circumstances." Lyra's jaw tightened at the lie. Cared for her. She thought of the cold kitchen floors, the missed meals, the years of scorn disguised as pity. But she said nothing, having long since learned that speaking up only invited more punishment. Cale studied Cohen for a long moment, his golden eyes narrowing slightly. "Cared for her," he echoed, and something in his tone suggested he did not believe a single word of it. He turned back to Lyra, his expression softening slightly as he addressed her directly. "Tell me what happened during your first shift. Everything you remember." The entire hall seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Lyra glanced toward Cohen, whose expression had turned to stone, then toward her parents seated near the back of the room, their faces pale and unreadable. She looked back at Cale, and something about the steadiness in his gaze gave her the courage to speak. "I remember pain," she said quietly. "My bones tried to shift, but something held my wolf back, as if it was trapped inside me. I collapsed in the forest. When I woke, The healer said my wolf was broken, that I would never shift completely. Since then, I have not been able to sense the pack bond the way others describe it. I feel nothing when the moon rises. I feel nothing when the pack howls together. I assumed something inside me was simply missing. Cale listened closely, his expression unreadable, though his wolf stirred restlessly beneath the surface, recognizing something in her words that the rest of the room could not yet understand. When she finished speaking, he turned toward one of his guards standing near the entrance, a tall man named Edric who served as his personal advisor on matters of ancient bloodlines. Edric, he said. Tell me what you know of the Silent Wolf lineage. A murmur rippled through the hall at the unfamiliar term. Edric stepped forward, bowing slightly before addressing the gathered crowd. The Silent Wolf lineage is nearly extinct, my Alpha King. It appears perhaps once in several generations, and its wolves are often mistaken for broken or incomplete during their first shift, since their transformation follows a different pattern from ordinary wolves. Their power does not announce itself through obvious strength or speed. Instead, it manifests as an ability to anchor the bond of powerful alpha wolves, coming even the most volatile bloodlines. Historical records suggest this lineage was deliberately hunted centuries ago, precisely because of the stability it could offer to a king's rule. Gasps rippled through the hall. Corwin's face had gone from pale to ashen, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Lyra stared at Edric, then at Cale, struggling to absorb what she had just heard. Everything she had been told about herself for the past 10 years, every cruel word, every dismissive glance, had been built on a misunderstanding no one had bothered to investigate. Cale stepped closer to her, his voice gentler now, though still carrying easily through the silent hall. Your wolf was never broken, he said. It was simply different from what this pack expected, and rather than seeking understanding, they chose to discard you. Lyra's throat tightened, emotion rising unexpectedly at hearing her own experience confirmed by someone with the knowledge and authority to know the truth. 10 years of isolation, 10 years of believing herself defective, and it had all been wrong. Corwin found his voice at last, though it trembled with barely concealed panic. Alpha King, we had no way of knowing this. Our healers examined her thoroughly. If we had understood her condition, we certainly would have treated her differently. Cale turned toward him, and for the first time since arriving, real anger flashed across his features, sharp and cold. Would you have, he said quietly. Or would you have simply found a different excuse to elevate those with louder bloodlines and brighter smiles, while a girl carrying one of the rarest gifts among wolves scrubbed your floors and ate your scraps? No one in the hall dared to answer. Elira, standing near the front with the other unmated women, had gone pale, her earlier confidence replaced by something closer to fear as she realized the implications of what she had witnessed only hours earlier, mocking a girl she now understood to be far more significant than herself. Cale returned his attention to Lyra, and something shifted in his expression, the anger softening into something deeper, more resolute. My wolf recognized you the moment your scent reached me, he said. Not because of what your bloodline could offer politically, though that matters little to me regardless, but because something in you calls to something in me that has waited 300 years for exactly this moment. Lyra's heart pounded, uncertain how to respond to words so far beyond anything she had ever imagined hearing directed at her. Cale reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away if she wished, his hand hovering near her shoulder. I intend to claim you as my mate, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the hall, loud enough for every witness present to hear. Before this gathering, before the packs assembled for the Alliance Summit, I will mark you as mine, if you will allow it. The question hung in the air, unexpected and genuine despite his position and power. Lyra realized, with something between shock and quiet wonder, that he was actually asking, not simply declaring, giving her a choice that no one in her entire life had ever offered her before. She thought of the years of cruelty, the cold floors, the empty plates, the family who had abandoned her out of shame. She thought of the strange comfort she had always found in the forest at night, wondering now if some part of her had always sensed something waiting beyond the life she had been forced to live. And she thought of the golden eyes now watching her with such careful patience, a king willing to pause before an entire assembly simply to ensure her consent. Yes, she said quietly, though her voice carried clearly through the silent hall. I allow it. A collective gasp swept through the room as Cale's expression shifted, relief and joy breaking through his usual composed exterior. He stepped closer, brushing her hair gently aside from her shoulder, his movements careful despite the barely contained power radiating from him. "This will bind us together," he said softly, meant only for her, though the entire hall listened in rapt silence. "My wolf to yours, my strength to your protection, for as long as we both shall live. Once marked, no other claim can be made upon you, and you will stand beside me as my equal, not beneath me as a subject." Lyra nodded, unable to trust her voice, and tilted her head slightly, offering him the access the ritual required. Cale leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, before finally sinking his teeth gently into the curve of her shoulder, marking her in the ancient tradition witnessed by every wolf gathered in that hall. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd as golden light seemed to pulse briefly from the point of contact, a visible confirmation of the bond forming between them, something none of the assembled wolves had witnessed in generations. Lyra gasped, not from pain, but from an overwhelming rush of sensation flooding through her body, as though a door long sealed shut had finally been thrown open. Her wolf, silent for 10 years, stirred powerfully within her for the first time since that terrible night in the forest, no longer trapped or broken, but simply waiting, patient and whole, for exactly this moment to awaken. Cale pulled back slowly, his eyes searching her face with concern. "Are you well?" he asked quietly. Lyra nodded, tears gathering unexpectedly in her eyes, though they were not tears of sorrow. "I feel it," she whispered. "The bond. I feel the pack bond for the first time in 10 years. Around them, the hall remained frozen in stunned silence, witnesses to a transformation none of them had thought possible, watching as the girl they had dismissed and mocked for a decade stood transformed before them, marked and claimed by the most powerful alpha king in the region. Corwin, still standing near his seat, looked as though the ground had opened beneath him. Every plan his pack had built around impressing the visiting king, every daughter paraded forward in hopes of securing an advantageous match, had collapsed in the span of a single evening, replaced by a reality none of them had anticipated. Cale turned to address the hall, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority now, calm but unmistakably final. "Let it be known throughout every territory represented here tonight," he announced. "Lyra Ashford is marked as my mate, protected under my authority, and any who have wronged her in the past will answer to me directly for their actions." His gaze swept deliberately across the hall, resting briefly on Elira, then on Corwin, then on the pale faces of Lyra's own parents seated near the back, before returning finally to Lyra herself, softening once again into something far gentler than the king's public declaration had carried. "Whatever this pack believed about you," he said quietly, meant only for her, was wrong. And they will understand exactly how wrong before I leave this place. Lyra looked around the hall at the faces that had spent 10 years looking through her as though she did not exist, now staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to fear to something that almost resembled shame. For the first time since that terrible night in the forest so many years ago, she did not feel invisible. She felt seen, completely and undeniably, standing beside a king who had chosen her not despite her difference, but because of it. News of the claiming traveled faster than any messenger could carry it. By morning, wolves from every visiting territory had heard the story, whispered from room to room until it reached every corner of the pack house before the sun had fully risen. The girl once hidden in the kitchens, the Omega dismissed as broken, had been marked by the Alpha King himself, before witnesses too numerous to dismiss the tale as rumor. Lyra woke that morning in a room she had never entered before, one of the finest guest chambers in the pack house, with soft blankets and a fire already crackling in the hearth. She sat up slowly, her shoulders still tender from the mark, and for a long moment simply stared at her surroundings, half expecting to wake and find herself back in the small storage closet she had called home for years. A soft knock sounded at the door before Cale entered, already dressed, his expression calm though his eyes carried a warmth she had not seen from him the previous evening. "How do you feel?" he asked, crossing the room to sit near the edge of her bed. "Strange," Lyra admitted honestly. "Everything feels different. I can feel the pack bond now, faint but present, like a sound I had forgotten how to hear. And I keep waiting for someone to tell me this was all a mistake." Cale's jaw tightened slightly at her words, though his voice remained gentle. "No one will tell you that, because it is not a mistake. You are my mate now, recognized before an entire assembly of witnesses. Nothing about that will change, regardless of what this pack believed about you before last night. Lyra nodded, though uncertainty still lingered beneath the surface, 10 years of conditioning not easily undone by a single evening, however extraordinary. Before she could respond further, a soft knock interrupted them again, and a servant appeared at the door, bowing deeply toward Cale. Alpha King, your presence is requested in the main hall. The Alliance Summit begins within the hour, and Alpha Cohen awaits your arrival. Cale rose, though he paused before leaving, turning back toward Lyra with an expression that left no room for doubt. You will attend the summit as well, he said. Not as a servant, but as my mate, seated beside me as is your right. Lyra's breath caught. I have never attended anything of that nature, she admitted. I would not know what is expected of me. What is expected, Cale said simply, is your presence beside me. Nothing more. The rest, we will learn together. An hour later, Lyra stood at the entrance of the great hall, dressed in clothing provided by Cale's own attendants, simple but finely made, nothing like the tattered garment she had worn for years. She felt every eye turned toward her as she entered, walking beside Cale toward the raised platform where the Alliance leaders had gathered, though this time the stairs carried none of the mockery she was accustomed to. Instead, she saw confusion, curiosity, and in some faces, something close to fear. Her parents stood near the edge of the hall, having been granted no special seating despite their status within the pack. Her mother's eyes met hers briefly before dropping to the floor, unable to hold her gaze. Her father remained still entirely, his expression carefully blank, though his hands trembled slightly at his sides. The summit proceeded through matters of trade agreement and territorial boundaries, discussions Lyra understood only partially, though she remained attentive, seated beside Cale as promised. It was only after the formal business concluded that Cale rose from his seat, addressing the assembled Alpha leaders directly. Before this gathering disperses, he said, there is a matter concerning the Blackthorn Pack that requires attention. My mate has informed me of certain treatment she endured within this pack over the past decade, treatment I intend to address before we depart. Corwin, seated at the head of the Blackthorn delegation, straightened nervously. Alpha King, surely such matters are internal concerns, best handled within our own pack structure. They became my concern the moment your pack chose to mistreat someone carrying the Silent Wolf lineage, Cale replied evenly. Someone who is now bonded to me. Explain to this assembly how a girl of such rare bloodline came to spend 10 years scrubbing floors and eating scraps within your walls. Silence stretched through the hall. Lyra felt her heartbeat quicken, uncertain whether to speak or remain quiet, until Cale's hand found hers beneath the table, a small gesture of reassurance that steadied her nerves. Tell them, he said quietly, meant only for her. Tell them exactly what happened. You no longer need to fear their response. Lyra rose slowly, her legs unsteady though her voice, when it came, carried surprising strength across the silent hall. After my first shift failed to complete properly, this pack decided I was broken, without ever consulting anyone beyond their own healers. I was removed from lessons alongside other children my age. My family stopped acknowledging me in public gatherings. I was assigned kitchen work at the age of 8, expected to earn my place through labor since my bloodline was considered worthless. I ate only after everyone else had finished, slept in a storage closet rather than proper quarters, and was mocked openly by pack members who considered themselves my betters. She glanced briefly at Elira, seated among the Blackthorn delegation, whose face had gone pale. And when I was hidden away during this very summit, ordered to remain in the kitchen so as not to embarrass this pack before visiting dignitaries, it was simply the continuation of 10 years of the exact same treatment. The hall remained utterly silent following her words. Several Alpha leaders from other territories exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly troubled by what they had just heard. Cale rose beside her, his expression cold as he addressed Cohen directly. 10 years, he said. 10 years this pack mistreated someone they did not understand, rather than seeking knowledge that might have revealed the truth. Tell me, Alpha Corwin, what consequence do you believe such treatment deserves? Corwin's face had drained of all color. Alpha King, I beg you to consider the reputation of this pack, built over generations. Surely we can find some resolution that does not require public punishment. Reputation, Cale repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. This pack built its reputation while discarding a member carrying one of the rarest gifts among our kind, simply because her differences were inconvenient to acknowledge. I find myself entirely unmoved by concerns over your reputation. He turned to address the full assembly once more, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the hall. Effective immediately, the Blackthorn Pact is stripped of its alliance protections. Any support previously guaranteed by neighboring territories in matters of defense or trade will be suspended pending a full review of this pact's conduct. Gasps rippled through the gathered leaders. Corwin rose abruptly, panic clear in his expression. Alpha King, please, such a decision leaves us vulnerable to rival territories who have long sought to expand into our lands. This punishment threatens the safety of every pack member, most of whom bear no responsibility for decisions made regarding a single individual. Cale's gaze remained hard, though he paused, considering Corwin's words with visible reluctance. Beside him, Lyra felt a flicker of something unexpected stir within her, not sympathy exactly, but an awareness that innocent pack members, children and elderly wolves who had no part in her mistreatment, would suffer alongside those truly responsible if protections vanished entirely. She touched Cale's arm gently, drawing his attention. "May I speak?" she asked quietly. Cale nodded, stepping back slightly to allow her the floor once more. Lyra faced the assembly, her earlier nervousness giving way to something steadier. "I do not wish for innocent members of this pact to suffer for decisions made by leadership," she said. "Whatever punishment is decided, I ask that it fall upon those responsible for the choices made against me, not upon every wolf living within these walls who had no voice in the matter." Cale studied her for a long moment, something like pride flickering behind his golden eyes. "Very well," he said finally, turning back toward the assembly. "Alliance protections will remain suspended for a period of one full season, during which this pact's leadership will be closely monitored. Full protections will be restored only if genuine reform is demonstrated, under terms I will personally establish before departing." Corwin sank back into his seat, visibly relieved despite the humiliation etched across his features. Around the hall, murmurs of surprise rippled through the gathered leaders, many turning to study Lyra with expressions that had shifted entirely from the previous day, curiosity now tinged with genuine respect. As the assembly began to disperse, Lyra's mother approached hesitantly, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. "Lyra," she began softly. "I know nothing I say can undo the years we failed you. I was afraid, ashamed, and I let that fear guide every decision I made regarding you. I am sorry, truly sorry, though I understand if that means nothing now." Lyra studied her mother's face, searching for the anger she expected to feel, and finding instead something quieter, more complicated. "I forgive you," she said finally, "though I will not forget. We can begin again, slowly, if you are willing to actually know me this time, rather than simply managing the shame of my existence." Her mother nodded, tears spilling freely now, and for the first time in 10 years, reached out to embrace her daughter, an act that drew quiet attention from those still lingering nearby, though Lyra barely noticed, focused entirely on the strange, tentative warmth of a bond she had thought lost forever. 3 weeks passed before Lyra fully understood the extent of what had changed within her. The bond with Cale had settled into something steady, a quiet awareness of him even when they stood in separate rooms, a warmth that pulsed gently whenever he drew near. Yet her wolf, though no longer silent, remained just out of reach, present but unformed, like a voice she could hear but not yet fully understand. They had traveled north to Cale's territory shortly after the summit concluded, leaving the Blackthorn Pact to navigate its probationary period under the terms Cale had established. The northern territory was unlike anything Lyra had known, vast forests stretching toward distant mountains, a pack house larger than anything she had imagined, filled with wolves who greeted her not with suspicion but with genuine curiosity about the woman who had captured their king's attention after 3 centuries of solitude. Edric, the advisor who had first explained her lineage, had taken a particular interest in her progress, visiting often to share what little historical knowledge remained regarding the silent wolf bloodline. "Your wolf is not broken, nor is it delayed," he explained one afternoon as they sat together in the library, surrounded by ancient texts and faded scrolls. "It has simply been waiting for conditions it recognizes as safe. Fear and isolation can suppress a bond as easily as physical injury. Now that you are protected, valued, and no longer alone, your wolf may find the space it needs to fully emerge." Lyra turned this thought over carefully in the weeks that followed, spending quiet mornings walking through the northern forest, testing the growing awareness she felt stirring beneath her skin. Cale often joined her, patient and attentive, never pushing her faster than she was ready to go, understanding intuitively that 10 years of suppression could not be undone through force or urgency. One evening, as the full moon rose heavy and golden over the tree-line, Cale found her standing at the edge of the forest, her eyes fixed on the horizon with an expression he had come to recognize as anticipation mixed with fear. "You feel it tonight," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Lyra nodded, her breath catching as something powerful stirred within her chest, stronger than anything she had felt since the marking. "I feel it pulling at me," she admitted. "Different from before. Not painful this time, but urgent, as though it has been waiting a very long time for this exact moment." "Then let it come," Cale said gently. "I will be here, regardless of what happens." Lyra closed her eyes, allowing herself to focus entirely on the sensation building beneath her skin, releasing the fear and doubt she had carried for a decade, trusting for the first time that whatever emerged would not be broken or wrong, simply different, exactly as Edric had promised. Her bones began to shift, smoothly this time, without the agony of her first shift so many years earlier, as though her body finally understood it was safe to transform completely. Within moments, where Lyra had stood, a wolf emerged instead, smaller than typical wolves of her pack, her coat a striking silver that seemed to catch and hold the moonlight itself, glowing faintly even in the darkness of the surrounding forest. She lifted her head, testing the unfamiliar sensation of 4 legs beneath her, of senses sharper and more vivid than anything she had experienced in human form. Cale's own wolf rose to meet her, larger and darker, though he moved with careful gentleness, circling her slowly, his golden eyes reflecting something close to wonder as he took in the sight of his mate finally, fully whole. Around them, several Northern Pack members who had gathered at a respectful distance let out low sounds of astonishment, having never witnessed the silent wolf's true form, a lineage many had assumed existed only in old stories told to pups before sleep. Lyra remained in her wolf form through most of that night, exploring the forest alongside Cale, feeling for the first time in her life the complete, unbroken connection to her own body and to the pack bond surrounding her. When she finally shifted back at dawn, exhaustion mixed with an overwhelming sense of peace she had never known before, as though a wound she carried since childhood had finally, truly healed. News of her transformation spread quickly through the Northern Territory and beyond, reaching even the Blackthorn Pack, where reports arrived of a silver wolf confirming the ancient bloodline everyone had assumed extinct. Requests began arriving from various territories, some seeking alliance through her newfound status, others simply curious to witness proof that the legendary lineage still existed among the living. Cale, watching the growing attention with a protective wariness, called a private council within his own territory to discuss how best to proceed. Lyra, seated beside him at the head of the gathering, listened carefully as his advisors debated various approaches, some suggesting a public ceremony to formally establish her as future Alpha Queen, others urging caution against drawing further attention to her rare bloodline. "I would like to speak," Lyra said, once the debate had quieted enough for her voice to be heard. Every eye in the room turned toward her, and though the weight of attention still felt unfamiliar, she no longer flinched beneath it as she once had. "I spent 10 years believing myself worthless," she began. "I understand better than anyone in this room what it feels like to be dismissed, to be treated as less than others simply because I did not fit expectations. If I am to stand as Alpha Queen, I do not wish to rule from a place of fear or secrecy. I would rather be honest about who I am and what I have endured, allowing others who may feel similarly broken or dismissed within their own packs to understand that difference is not a defect." Cale studied her with quiet pride, reaching over to take her hand beneath the table. "Then we will hold a formal ceremony," he said, turning to address the gathered council. "Not merely to confirm a bloodline or secure alliances, but to establish clearly the values this territory will carry forward under our joint leadership." The ceremony took place 1 month later, beneath a clear evening sky, attended by representatives from nearly every territory within the alliance, including a humble delegation from the Blackthorn Pack, whose probationary period had concluded with genuine reforms Cale had personally verified. Corwin stood among them, his posture subdued, no longer the confident Alpha who had once dismissed Lyra as worthless. Lyra stood before the assembled crowd, dressed in flowing silver fabric that echoed the color of her wolf, Cale beside her in formal dark robes befitting his station. Edric stepped forward to perform the ceremony, his voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd as he recited ancient words binding their partnership formally before all present. When the ceremony concluded, Cale turned to address the assembly directly, his hand still clasped firmly around Lyra's. "Many of you have heard the story of how my mate came to stand beside me," he said. Discarded by her original pack, dismissed as broken, forced into servitude for a difference she never chose and could not control. Today, she stands not merely as my mate, but as Alpha Queen of this territory, a position she has earned through resilience few among us could have survived. He paused, his gaze sweeping deliberately toward the Blackthorn delegation before continuing. "Let this be a lesson carried back to every territory represented here today. Difference is not weakness. What one pack discards as broken, another may recognize as a strength beyond measure. I ask that every leader present examine their own territories carefully, ensuring no one within their walls suffers the fate my mate endured for 10 long years." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Lyra felt the weight of the moment settle over her, not as a burden, but as something closer to purpose. She thought of the girl who had once knelt on cold kitchen floors, believing herself unworthy of anything beyond scraps and silence, and felt a quiet gratitude toward that same girl for surviving long enough to reach this moment. As the formal proceedings concluded and the gathered crowd began to celebrate late into the evening, Lyra slipped away briefly with Cale toward the edge of the forest, the same forest that had once offered her the only comfort available during her darkest years. Standing beneath the same trees that had listened to her whispered thoughts through countless lonely nights, she finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of everything that had changed. "I used to come to forests like this one, hoping someone, anyone, might understand what I was going through," she admitted quietly. "I never imagined I would stand here as an Alpha Queen, mated to someone who chose me exactly as I was." Cale wrapped his arm gently around her shoulders, drawing her close. "Your wolf was never broken," he said softly. "It simply waited for the right moment, the right person, the right pack, to finally let itself be seen. And I intend to spend every day ensuring you never doubt your place beside me again." Lyra leaned into him, watching moonlight filter through the branches above, feeling the steady pulse of the bond connecting them, no longer faint or uncertain, but strong and unshakable. Behind them, the sounds of celebration continued, laughter and music drifting through the northern territory that had become, against every expectation she once held, truly her home. For the first time in her entire life, Lyra Ashford stood not as the Omega everyone despised, but as exactly who she had always been beneath the years of cruelty and dismissal, whole, valued, and finally, completely free.